Welcome to Inside the Canopy Files, a production of Canopy Realtor Association in Charlotte, North Carolina. Imagine discovering you are not the person you thought you were, that you have a family, a history, an ethnicity you never knew. How would this discovery impact your life, the lives of those around you, your vision of yourself and society? Michael Fosberg grew up in a white working-class family outside of Chicago, raised by his biological mother and adoptive father. In his early 30s, his parents divorced, setting off a series of discoveries that shook his foundation and forced him to take a closer look at the person he thought he was. Armed with only a name and a city, he set out to track down his biological father, stumbling upon him in a miraculous first phone call. During the call, Michael learns, quote, a couple of things from his father that his mother never told him. On today's episode of Inside the Canopy Files, hosted by Realtor, broker, and chair of Canopy's Diversity and Inclusion Alliance, Eric Norman, and Canopy staff, Karyn Lindsey, Fosberg talks about his journey, his one-man play Incognito, and his DEI training company of the same name, which has led him to inspire organizations to recognize our commonalities are stronger than our differences.
We are so excited to have you with us today on this podcast, and Canopy Realtor Association is thrilled to have you present to our members in your unique way. The topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, but as you've noted, it's not a topic that a lot of people want to talk about. But before we tackle why that is, I want to back it up and have you tell us your story and how you ended up talking with your father and those couple of things your mother never told you. Give us some background, and then let's talk about that phone call with your father and what you learned that changed everything for you.
Sure. You want me to go ahead and tell the whole story?
Just, you can give us a little hint, because you're not spoiling it for anybody who's going to see it today.
Okay. All right. Well, good. I'm giving you the short version of the story, but, so I was raised, in a working class white family in the northern suburbs of Chicago, a little town called Waukegan. And I was raised by my biological mother, who was of Armenian descent, and an adoptive stepfather who was of Swedish descent. And when they had a couple of kids when I was older, and then when I was in my early 30s, my parents announced they were getting a divorce. And I realized when they said that I didn't know who my biological father was. You see, my mother had never told me anything about my biological father. And frankly, I was 2 years old when we left him, and then she remarried when I was about 5. So I was so young that I really didn't comprehend, father, who, all of that. So I was too young to really ask questions. But I had a British girlfriend at the time who sort of encouraged me to ask some questions. You don't know who your biological father is. Your parents are getting a divorce, but you don't even know who the first dad was. And you've never asked any questions. This time you should ask your mom some questions. And so I called my mother, and she gave me a couple of bits of information. She told me his name was John Sidney Woods, and she told me that some 30 years ago, she thought that he lived in the Detroit area. She wasn't sure, but she thought that's where he lived. So armed with that information, I went to the library. The libraries used to house this ancient device that we use to find people. I'm referring to the phone book, for those of you who are old enough to remember phone books. So libraries used to house phone book sections, and they'd have major cities from around the country. Lots of libraries did, some didn't, but I was living in Santa Monica, California. It's a big city. They had a phone book section. I went to look for the Detroit phone book. I looked up his name. There were about 5 or 6 listings of John Sidney Woods. I copied down all the names and numbers. I went home, and now I was scared out of my mind. Like, what do I do now? Like, this is crazy. Like, what if I can't find him? What if it's the guy? How am I going to know it's the guy? I came up with a bunch of questions. And finally, I gathered the courage to pick up the phone, and I dialed the first number on the list, and a guy answers the phone. And right there, I was like, so, wait, what's the first question? And I said, I'm looking for a John Sidney Woods. And he kind of paused, and he said, "You're speaking with him." And I was like, whoa, it's too easy, right? That's way too easy. I said, well, did you live in the Boston area in 1957? Because that's where my mom and I lived with my father at that time. And he paused again. It seemed like an hour. And he said, yeah, I did. And I thought, oh no, this is way, way too easy. And I said, well, were you married to an Armenian woman? My mom's Armenian, by the name of Adrian Piliposian. And again, there was this long pause. I was holding my breath, and he said, yes, I was. And I realized that I had tracked my father down, my biological father, in a first phone call after 30 years. I was just beside myself. And I was probably like speaking like really crazily, stumbling and we were trying to like wrap our heads. I said, my name is Michael Fosberg and I'm your son. And then I realized like, oh, wait a minute, maybe he didn't want me to reach out to him. I've heard stories about kids who had gone and found their parent, and then the parent didn't really want to have anything to do with them. And I said, it's okay if you don't want to talk to me. I just want to call and find out how you're doing, let you know I was doing okay. He said, no, my God, son. And when he said the word son, it wrecked me. And he said, son, how are you? Where are you? And I said, I'm fine. I live in Santa Monica, California. And then he said, and your mother, how's your mother doing? And my mother and I, when she got divorced from my stepfather, we had a pretty big argument, and we were not on the best of terms. I blamed my mother for the divorce, and really what was going on, as explained by my British girlfriend at the time, was I was really upset because I didn't know who my biological father was. So I wasn't speaking to my mother very much at the time. And I said, well, he asked me, my father asked me, how's your mom doing? I said, well, she's okay, I think. He said, what do you mean, you think, you guess? And I said, well, she just got divorced. We're not on the best of terms right now. And he said, no, she's the only mother you've got. Try not to be too hard on her. And then we, we're trying to wrap our heads around, you're my dad, I'm your son. What do we say? And he said, out of the blue, he says to me, son, there's a couple of things you should know. I'm sure your mother's never told you. I was like, okay. Aside from not telling me about you, what else could there be? And he said, well, first of all, I want you to know that no matter what you were told or what you thought happened, I've always loved you. And I've thought about you a lot. Again, I was wreck. And then he said, there's one other thing I'm sure your mother's never told you. And I was like, what? And he said, I'm African American. And for listeners, I was living in an apartment that was about the size of this studio that we're in. Okay. It's like a tiny room. That was my entire apartment. And there was a mirror across the room from me, a full wall mirror. And I kind of like caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, like, whoa, did I just change? Like I was looking for like clues, like, cause okay, he's black, I'm black. What? Like that wasn't my identity to that point. And then he said, your family, or our family goes back. And he proceeded to tell me about my great-great-grandfather, who was a member of the 54th Regiment in the Colored Infantry Unit in the Civil War. My great-grandfather, who was an all-star pitcher in the Negro Leagues. My grandfather, who was a genius in the science and engineering departments at Norfolk State University, is named after my grandfather, and they're still alive, my grandparents. And I was like, whoa, can we get back to the black part? Because I'm still trying to wrap my head around the black part. You just laid down this history for me. And we talked some more, and then we exchanged phone numbers, and we promised we'd stay in touch. And that is the beginning of the journey. There's a lot more following that, which maybe I'll save.
So, Michael, after this major revelation in your life and the powerful journey you've been on, you've authored 2 books, Incognito, An American Odyssey of Race and Self-Discovery, which was published in 2011, and your second newest book, Nobody Wants to Talk About It, Race, Identity, and the Difficulty in Forging Meaningful Conversations. And, of course, you have the one-man play. You could have stopped at that and just done the book tours, but you decided that this is your life's work, bringing this kind of training and conversations into organizations. So what drives you to continue this work on an even larger scale for organizations and companies?
Oh, what drives me? I guess I would say it's as simple as conversations like this. I mean, people don't have these conversations. People don't talk about these things. And I've seen the power of storytelling. I mean, I've always been a storyteller. I've always been an actor, a director, a writer. So I've seen how powerful stories affect people and how they can make big changes in people's lives. I've also seen how, as an artist, telling my story, and when I say telling my story, I'm talking about what people just heard prior to this previously was I told this, beautiful story about meeting my father and everything, but it wasn't like an all beautiful journey. Nobody's story is a beautiful, all up, uplifting story. There are lots of trials and tribulations in along the way. And so I also share those trials and tribulations. And some of those things are embarrassing, if I'm frank about it.
But it's real. Yeah.
Absolutely. And what happens, what I've learned as an artist, as a storyteller, is that by sharing those difficult moments, people see themselves in me. So not everybody's had the same experience, the same story that I've had, but we all go on a journey of self-exploration, whether we're conscious of it or not. We're all trying to figure out who we are, where we fit in, and we stumble and we fall and we have some triumphs and things like that. And by sharing all of those things, people see themselves in my story. And so those kinds of things are what drive me to continue to do what I do.
Amazing. Yeah. So, your latest book, Nobody Wants to Talk About It, Race, Identity, and the Difficulty in Forging Meaningful Conversations. So just the title alone can address some uncomfortable facts.
Yes.
So why is it that no one really wants to talk about these topics anymore? And why is race and identity so uncomfortable for people?
Well, first of all, I would say that it's not like anymore. No one's ever really wanted to talk about these topics. It's very difficult and it's very uncomfortable. It's very cumbersome because, I talk about this a lot. So white people, and this is difficult because I'm both, so I have to play both sides. White people, we tend to come from a place of caution when we're asked to have these conversations because we don't want to say anything that might sound uncomfortable or racist or homophobic or whatever it might be. And so we tend to approach it from a place of caution. And then, of course, because we haven't grown up having those conversations, when we're asked to have those conversations, it's awkward and uncomfortable because, I have never had this conversation before. How do I do this? What if I say something insulting? Whatever, you know what I mean? And so how can you have an open conversation if you're starting from a place of caution? Right. And then on the other side, we have people of color who are ready to pounce on anyone or anything that sounds remotely racist or homophobic or whatever it might be. And so we're polarized. And we don't have those conversations. And I'm here to tell you, and this is one of the tools, I've set up a set of tools. We'll probably get to those in our conversation today. And one of the tools is get comfortable being uncomfortable. I know I didn't make that up. I heard that somewhere, but that resonated with me. And it's so true with this conversation in particular. And who wants to be comfortable being uncomfortable like that? God forbid I want to do that. But we all experience that at some point, probably every day. Probably every day we have an uncomfortable moment. We're probably not conscious of it all the time. And we work through it somehow, whether it's, at work or with your family or going home or whatever it might be, and you work through it. And so what I'm here to suggest is that we need to do the same with this conversation. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. And with that comes another tool, which is, and we've lost this ability, completely lost this ability. We can disagree so long as we're not disagreeable. We're at each other's throats. And today, that's like a badge of honor, getting in somebody's face and tell them what you think and all of that. That's not my job as a human being. I may disagree with your politics or your religion or whatever, the food you eat, it doesn't, whatever. There's plenty of things to disagree on. But that doesn't mean I need to get in your face. You're a human being, so am I. That's why this whole thing, I've talked about this so many times, it's been politicized. But DEI isn't about politics, it's about people.
So how do we press forward in having this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly with things that are coming out of Washington, and they really want us to discontinue having these conversations?
Yeah.
Where do we go from here?
Come on, give us that knowledge.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it's not easy. I gravitate from trying not to read the news because it is so depressing, to also sort of sneaking in some news so that I can talk about it in the work that I do. We're probably going to talk about this at some point. The major focus of the work that I do is really my message is we have more in common than we have different. It's probably pretty obvious to listeners at this point. Maybe it's not. I don't know. That I'm not a fan of the current administration. It doesn't matter. It's what I want from the other side is to sit down and have a conversation. We're not going to agree on everything. That's okay. Let's just talk. Let's not my way or the highway. That's not. Compromise is the golden thing, man. That's where it's at. That's really what I'll tell you. I'll tell you this quick story. It's the first story in the book. Nobody wants to talk about it. I was, and this of course is no longer going to happen. I was at the Treasury Department, the U.S. Department of Treasury in Washington D.C. I've been going there a number of times over a number of years. I've met the Treasury Secretary under Obama, Jack Lew. I met the Deputy Treasury Secretary, Elizabeth Raskin, who was married to Jamie Raskin, the congressman from Maryland. I've met other administrators and whatnot. I went during the Trump administration. I happen to know the diversity director there, and I actually don't even know if she's still there because the last we spoke a few months ago, she was hanging on by a thread. I hope she's still there. Anyway, she brought me in to do the presentation. It's always a wonderful time. It's always well attended. We always have a really great conversation afterwards. But when I went to greet her and got through the multi-level of security to get in, she warned me that an administrator from the Treasury was going to come and greet me. Now, going to a government agency is filled with pomp and circumstance. There's lots of greetings and photographs and handshaking and all that kind of stuff. I'm used to it because I've been doing it now for a little while. But she warned me that this gentleman was from the Trump administration and that he did not approve of DEI at all. Looked down on it, was really pushing back on the work that she was trying to do there, found it divisive and all this. And so before he walked in the room to do the handshaking and the photographing and all that kind of stuff, in my mind, I'm going to use my tools. So he walked in, and the first thing I did was try to find a commonality. Find a commonality with someone. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking and we're going back and forth. And then it turns out that he lived in California. I lived in California. He lived in Santa Monica. I lived in Santa Monica. We both went to some of the same places in Santa Monica. We started talking about our favorite places in Santa Monica that we started forming a bond. And we started connecting. And then, I don't remember, we talked about some other stuff, some other things that we found connection in. And before you know it, we were laughing and, slapping each other's backs, and it was great. And so it was time to go and do the presentation. He was going to do the intro and then leave because administrators don't have time to sit around for presentations like that. And he turns to the diversity director and he says, you know what, I think I'd rather that you did the introduction, and I'd just like to stay and sit in the back and watch the presentation.
Wow.
And yeah, if you could have seen the jaw of the diversity director, it was on the floor. She's looking at me like, wow.
This is a first.
Wow. And so, yeah, sure, great. So we go in and she does the off the cuff introduction, and then I do the show, and it's, fantastic. You're loving it, laughing, crying, all kinds of stuff, standing ovation afterwards. He's in the audience the whole time, sitting in the back, watching it, laughing, smiling. And then we go into the Q&A and we have this wonderful conversation, great dialogue and stuff. And then he kind of raises his hand like, I'm going to come up and do a closing. And I'm like, oh, sure, come on up. So he comes up and he says, wow, this was an amazing presentation. Would you not agree with me? Let's give Michael another round of applause. This was incredible. What a deeply moving journey he just took us on. I just can't thank you enough. Mm-hmm. I'm like, and the diversity director sitting in the front row was like shell shocked. And then he pulls out his phone and he shows me a photograph on his phone. And it's a picture of him with an afro. Now, in my play, I bring out a photograph of me with an afro because when I was younger, I couldn't comb my hair. I couldn't brush my hair. Obviously, we're good we have listeners right now because I don't actually have much hair left anymore. But anyway, but I had an afro, and he found that in common. He had an afro when he was a young teenager, and I turned to him and I said, oh, you had a Jew-fro. And we laughed and we soul handshaked, and the audience lost it, and it was sealed. We had bonded, and he loved the journey. He went on this ride in which he saw himself. He didn't have the same experience. He saw himself in my story. Okay, not the end of the story. 3 days later, they had a staff meeting. And at the staff meeting, he got up in front of the room and shared what a wonderful experience he had had that day in the room with me telling my story, and how it opened up new ideas and new thought for him.
That's powerful. I mean, just finding, again, those commonalities with people. And then, I mean, he had some aha moments.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is just a testament of how important it is just to, again, find those commonalities. And it's amazing the perspective that you can have about not only other people, but about yourself.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a little bit about Incognito, the play, and without giving too much away, because I do think it's something powerful that people should experience in person if they have the opportunity. But can you tell us a little bit more about Incognito?
Well, I just told you the beginning of the story up to the discovery of my father. But encapsulating following that, I ended up meeting my grandparents. Which is in the play. I play both my grandmother and my grandfather.
Actually, can I pause you? Can you hit on that a little bit? That it is a one-man play.
Yeah,
you are becoming the character.
Yeah, for many people, that's really a different experience. I don't know how often people see one-person plays, let alone plays these days. I don't know, but one-person plays are unique and different. I play over a dozen different characters, and I portray family members, both black and white. Which for some is jarring, and for some actually have been offended by it. Some, both black and white members of the audience have been offended by my portrayals of black members of my family, which brings up the question of, okay, if I can't portray them, who can? Like, this is my family. And I have tried to lovingly portray them as I recall them. People in my family have suggested, like, wow, you got your grandma down and all that kind of stuff. That is not to say, though, that people might not see what they perceive as stereotypes. This opens up the door on a conversation about stereotypes. What are they? Thoughts, beliefs, attributes about groups of people without taking into consideration individual differences. Also, the idea that a white-looking guy portrays black characters is difficult for people to wrap their head around unless they saw Tropic Thunder, which is a whole different thing. So the play goes on. I meet my grandparents. I meet it kind of ends at Martha's Vineyard, where I meet a second cousin of mine, and she takes me to a black beach there, which is very famous, called the Inkwell. And there's a party there, and I realize, wow, this is what my life would have been like had I been raised black. And then I realize, whoa, wait a minute. How would I have fit in? And so then I start to challenge the audience about, what race am I now? How do you see me now? So that's the gist of the whole play.
Awesome.
So the training for your organizations, you talked about it. You talk about trying to look at the commonalities that people have, and that's part of what, the training you provide.
Yeah.
And there, obviously differences in people, and it's safe to have conversations, I think, around those differences as well. I think there's nothing wrong. So what type of discussions and things like that, do you think we need to start having around diversity that can be healthy discussions?
Yeah. Well, and so I'm going to go back to the tools again. The first tool is pretty obvious. Tell your story. Tell your story. We each have beautiful, unique stories. And some people, will come up to me after they've seen the play, and they're like, oh my gosh, you have an amazing story. My life is so boring. And I'm like, no, it's not. You just haven't really thought about telling it. And it's kind of the way you tell it. And I'm trained to do that. But your story is probably really rich and unique. That's first. That's first tool. The second tool, though, is don't judge the differences. Instead of judging the differences, start by finding a commonality and then embrace the differences. Because after all, if we were all the same, we'd be bored.
Very boring.
It'd be very boring. And frankly, we live in a really schizophrenic kind of society in that we all want to, shop at the same stores or whatever. You do Gap or Old Navy or whatever it might be. And yet at the same time, we want to have the coolest glasses or the neatest shoes or the most unique belt or whatever it might be. So we're all trying to be individuals, but we're also trying to fit in. And I think that's part of the, I often challenge people with this question. What does it mean to be an American? If you ask that question to a room full of people, you're going to get a room full of different answers because it means something different to everybody. That's American right there. Everybody has a different answer. That is the essence of being American.
So you did talk about some of your tools, and on your website, you address diversity and inclusion solutions, and you mentioned utilizing a set of 7 tools.
Yes.
So really with these actionable tools, I should say, they really set the foundation for not only DEI objectives, but leadership and management goals as well. Yeah. So if you could share a little bit more about those 7 tools and how you use them to conduct training.
Sure. Well, what I'm trying to get people to do is have difficult conversations. And, the degree of difficulty is different for each person. So I don't want to for some, they've had some difficult conversations and they've been successful at it. For some, they've never had difficult they avoid it or whatever. So I give them tools to do that. We've gone over several of them, but I'll go over all of them real quickly. So again, the first is tell your story. The second, don't judge the differences. But here's one. We need to recognize that there isn't one way to have a conversation about race and identity. If there was one way to do it, we'd all be doing it. Right. That would make it a lot easier, right? If it was A plus B equals C, if there was a formula for it, we'd all be doing it. But there isn't, because we're each approaching the conversation from our own experience of identity. And that is different for each of us. And so that's why it gets really, really messy. But we need to recognize that in those conversations, someone might say something that might be offensive. That doesn't mean you need to jump on that person. You need to bring that person in, ask questions. You can disagree or not, but continue to stay in it. Get comfortable being uncomfortable. Disagree as long as you're not disagreeable. And then we have to understand that there are realities outside of our own experience. Just because we haven't experienced racism or sexism or homophobia or disability indifference or some other form of discriminatory treatment doesn't mean those aren't realities for other people. Mm-hmm. So we need to listen with empathy. And then finally, this is something that comes up in the play quite a bit. Well, it's a big moment in the play, I guess I would say, although I don't actually identify it as this, but it is what it is. Practice forgiveness. Most of us, and in particular now, present day, we walk around with resentments, with anger. That is poisoning our dialogue, our conversation, our country, our civic engagement. We've got to learn to forgive. We've got to be able to, it doesn't mean that you need to condone the behavior of someone that you find offensive or whatever it might be. But if you walk around resenting that person, that's like a poison. And so you got to learn to forgive.
Absolutely. And yeah, I think that's so important, is that like hanging on to these things isn't hurting that other person or that group of people that you're upset with. It's only hurting yourself.
That's right.
Yeah,
once you're able
internalize
to get to
it.
that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it really can be life, not just changing, but it can really enhance your life in so many ways, and how you respond to other people after being able to forgive. So.
Absolutely. Good point. Yeah. Really, really important.
So companies have taken a stand to do this type of work and are often said, you're not doing enough. We're not moving fast enough. And we can honestly say that we've had that experience a little bit here at Canopy.
Yeah.
For nearly 20 years, we felt, we wanted to get outside of our comfort zone, and we've started our diversity initiatives. We have a Diversity and Inclusion Alliance, and we focus on, having conversations like this, having training, and having opportunities for our members to connect in ways maybe they didn't get to connect before.
Yeah.
What is some of the best ways you think we can continue to address, even during this time of during Fair Housing Month, where we're doing a presentation here and having you here as our guest, but what's some more other ways we can have some more conversations and address these issues?
Yeah. I feel first of all, I want to commend you and your organization for doing this, and for being committed to it, and for following through, and for inviting me here, and for opening up the conversation, and for encouraging your members to be partake in it. It's, I think we talked about this at one point in time about, most of the people in the room today will not, are not ones who have already felt that this is an important topic, that this is an important thing. Those who aren't here are the ones who really should hear the message again about being together, but they've mistaken the message for something else. Diversity means all. Like, it means every aspect of the larger picture. So it's not just people of color, it's not just LGBT, it's not just neurodiverse, it's not just disabled, it's not just older people or younger people, it's not just black, white, Hispanic, it's all of them together. Look, when you go to a financial advisor, the number one rule that a financial advisor is going to tell you
is diversify.
Diversify your portfolio. Why?
You benefit more from the diversity.
Exactly. You will make, if you want to get down to the course part of it, you will make more money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? This effort going on right now is going to stifle that across the country, across whatever it might be, the federal government, educational institutions, the push in corporations and what. Look, corporations got the message a long time ago. This is going to help us. We're going to open ourselves up to new markets, to new people, bring them in, embrace everybody. That's so important. Here's a thing that I think brings people together. You're asking more specifically about what can we do. And I love this idea. I've been to a few schools and a few organizations that have done this, and it's a fun thing to do. Have a potluck and invite people to bring food that is from their families, from their backgrounds, and then talk about that. Talk about what it meant to your family. Talk maybe about how it, was presented, or when it was done, when you remember first eating it and what it meant to you, what it means to you today. People love to eat. So there's a fun thing that you can do to bring people together to talk about similarities. We all like to eat. Mm-hmm. Differences, different food.
Yeah, so you just found that commonality.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I'm from the South, so food is a huge thing in our family, and we knew whose dish not to go to at the potluck because we questioned where their kitchen skills were. But most of all, but it was mostly positive. But again, but it created that conversation, and it's like it was something that connected everybody there, even if they grew up with our family, if they were brought into our family. They were like, wow, you guys are really proud about your food. So I love that example.
Yeah.
And, I guess trying to increase that engagement, like that's a great, recommendation on increasing it because, with diversity, inclusion, equity, they're all buzzwords or coded words now. Right. And I think the meaning behind them has, to your point, like people aren't seeing what it actually is about.
Right.
So, for us at our association, it tells the majority race that it's a topic about and for people of color, or that deals with gender issues, and that we're typically preaching to the choir. So, like the event tonight, I think a lot of people that, typically come to events, they feel connected to this already. Right. I don't know if they're really sourcing it of like, hey, I'm trying to open myself up and learn more. They might be attending because they feel comfortable because it's like, hey, like I feel like I'll have a place here. But what we want to do, instead of just preaching it, to the choir, or, we want to broaden it. So we're really trying to, broaden that with our majority race members as well. So I guess, how do we bring in the larger audiences for this type of education?
Yeah, that is the $10 million question. And I think you sort of touched on it a little bit. You have to make everybody feel like they're a part of it. Like majority members, minority members. Again, diversity is all. It's about the bigger picture of all of us together. If there's a faction missing, then we're not diverse. Okay. And we also have to help them understand how diversity enhances our goals, which is to be a more profitable, if we want to, be coarse about it, more accepting, more trusted organization. All of those things. We talked about diversity, diversify your portfolio. Another example I've used in the past is I grew up in a small community outside of Chicago, north of Chicago, and when I was growing up, a thing went through our community, Dutch elm disease. And there were elm trees on all the parkways all across the city, and all the trees died because no one could figure out how to solve Dutch elm disease. They didn't diversify what they had planted. Now we didn't have any shade. The trees are all dead. You got to diversify in order to thrive. And I think that's a part of asking people, look, we want to thrive. We want you to be a part of it. Now, you're not going to convince everybody. You're just not. Especially today when it's been politicized. If you can get them to understand that this is about human beings, this is about us, this is about all of us trying to work together, trying to be a better organization, trying to be better people, maybe you'll have some success, but again, you're never going to convince everybody.
Yeah, you're never going to convince everybody. But I mean, even if it's that one person who might have influence, like you shared your story earlier, and the fact that not only did he stay for the presentation, he continued applauding and getting everybody, more involved even after the presentation. And so whenever you do something like that and you feel like you can at least reach one person, then I think it's made a difference, because he's probably went home and shared your story because to him it's probably very unique. I think it's unique to a lot of people. Yeah. So I think knowing that you're not going to be able to reach everybody, you have to be okay with that. But just being authentic and sharing, what your truth is, and for organizations to be able to just to attempt, to reach a broader audience by being honest and just sharing stories, I think is really, really powerful when you've proven that.
Absolutely. You mentioned the word authentic, and I want to sort of riff off on that, because that is really I'm sort of obsessed with that word, fascinated by the word. I have a podcast, and we're on a podcast. I have a podcast, although I haven't done any new episodes in quite some time. But the podcast is called Authenticity, Belonging, Community, the ABCs of Inclusivity. And what I've noticed, and the reason I started the podcast was...
Can you say it one more time?
Sure,
I want to make I'm sure people hear this.
Authenticity, belonging, community, the ABCs of inclusivity. I've been doing this work for over 20 years, and what fascinates me is that I've been in all kinds of different spaces: corporations, educational institutions, government organizations, realtor associations, all different types. And what's fascinating to me is there are a lot of people doing this work, but they're not necessarily DE&I people. They're salespeople, or they're front office people, or they're management, middle management, or upper management, or whatever. And they're doing this work. And the work I'm speaking of is bringing people together, making people feel like they're included in the decisions that are going on, or in the process that's happening, or whatever. And so what I was interested in is, how do you go about doing that? What do you do? What tools do you use to make people feel like they're a part of it? And so I interview dozens of people from all different businesses and occupations, people from government, people from the arts, people from business, engineering, all across the spectrum. And I bring them in, and we talk about how they go about creating an inclusive environment for those that they work with. And I just find it absolutely fascinating. And this idea of being authentic is a real big part of that. So.
Yeah, and I noticed too with Canopy, like it was, as Karyn mentioned, like 20 years ago is when, they really were intentional about it. And I know that even today, the executive leadership, the staff, they do a lot of training. And I find it interesting, when organizations and companies like ours did, before there was a box to check, like that's when I think the real conversations were happening, even 20 years or beyond. I think real conversations were happening then because they didn't know that they were supposed to check a box. It was just, hey, we really want to have these authentic, conversations, and people share stories. And, I think you sharing your story, we've learned so much, but I've been able to adapt and connect to things that you've said, and I've looked at my own life differently because of it. So I think the more we can share and be authentic, about ourselves and our lives is really helpful for others.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So, Michael, this has been great conversation, and we really appreciate the time you've taken to be with us here today. Do you have any lasting thoughts you'd like to share? Last thought you'd like to share before we conclude?
I'm sort of squirming in my seat when you ask that question. I normally answer that with the following: silence gives consent. If we are silent and we don't speak up, then we are complicit in what is happening. But, and I still advocate for that, But we are in a situation currently in which dissent is being squashed, is being prosecuted even. Law firms are being prosecuted for representing people. They did away with, I don't know if I read this thing that they did away with the edict that segregation is okay now in businesses and retail. Apparently, he signed as an executive order saying you can segregate now if you want at your business or your retail. Now, the idea that anybody would actually do that, although it did happen at one point in time, but it's actually a federal law, so it's illegal, so the executive order doesn't mean anything really, except that that's the kind of thing that is hanging over all of us. And so when I say speak up, silence gives consent, sometimes people might be in a position where they might, I don't know, lose their job or,
lose access to resources that they need.
Access to resources, feel physically threatened. I mean, all of these things are happening now. It's crazy to think about that. And again, I still advocate that we should stand up and speak. I also say with that speak up from a place of respect. I disagree with what's going on, but here's why I disagree, because this method that we use helps bring people together and there's a bigger, greater outcome. How about that?
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you, Eric, for participating in this conversation.
Thanks for inviting me.
It's been great. A big thank you to our audience for listening. And if you'd like to learn more about Michael Fosberg and the great work he's doing in the space, visit incognitotheplay.com.
That's right.
Awesome.
Thank you
Michael.
both. This is wonderful. And thank you to your organization for really being committed to this. I'm very respectful of that.
We're excited to have you here. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Inside the Canopy Files, presented by Canopy Realtor Association in Charlotte, North Carolina. Connect with us online at carolinahome.com.